The global climate is changing faster than expected, and the effects are already plain to see. Too much water from storms and flooding is driving people from their homes. Elsewhere, too little water is robbing people of their livelihoods. All this could produce the largest wave of migration in human history. Up to 1 billion people may be displaced by climate change in this century. Initially, most will be poor people in the global south, even as the wealthy north seals its borders.
It's true that we humans are causing climate change. It's real and it exists. People who deny it are lying to themselves. They can see and feel the effects of it in their surroundings. They can feel the effects of climate change.
In the Philippines, the future has already arrived. Tropical storms, flooding and heavy rains are striking at ever shorter intervals and growing in intensity.
Climate change is the worst creation to be produced by our species. We humans have created climate change.
And more people are on the run from it. If sea levels rise to the extent that scientists have predicted, then by 2030, millions of people on the coasts worldwide will be in acute danger. The densely populated coastal regions of Asia will be most affected. BINUANGAN is an island district on the Bay of Manila. Here, water is already eating away at the land. Every year, this community has been sinking 4 to 6 centimeters deeper into the sea. Residents have to rebuild their houses on the rooftops of their old, sunken homes.
Ang nakakatakot diyan sa patuloy na pagtaas ng tubig.
What scares me the most about this steady seawater rise is that someday we won't even see the roofs anymore.
Alos hindi na rin makita yung bubong o mawala na rin yung buong
entire houses will vanish.
Sa pagtatambak o paghabol ng lumulubog na.
And at the same time we'll keep trying to build up the ground through land reclamation.
Yung pag sa pagtatambak yung mga lumulubog na bahay.
George de Omania, who goes by Jojo, is captain of the community's rescue vessel. He's been homeless for years now. Since the rising water made his house unlivable, he's been sleeping at his workplace.
Eto.
Jojo doesn't come here much anymore. After the water began to destroy their home, his wife took their son and left. At high tide, everything here is submerged.
The water was knee-deep here. We had to stow things in higher places to keep them safe. If the water reached the bed, then we had to wait for it to subside before we could sleep. This was a happy home. We usually had visitors, friends, relatives. We'd all be together inside this house, chatting, sharing meals, sometimes drinking. Now it makes me sad to think about this house, abandoned.
Jojo dreams of restoring his house, But at the moment, he doesn't have enough money.
The house is continuously sinking, kind of like the fate of my family.
Tuloy-tuloy siyang lumulubog. Ganun din yung
We rarely see each other
pamilya ko,
because everyone has to watch out for their livelihood.
Dahil
I do too.
masigit na
That's why we haven't seen each other for a while.
Mabubuhay. Ganun din naman ako, kaya hindi kami ganong nagkakasama-sama.
Many families have been torn apart. The young people move away to seek work. In 2018 alone, an estimated 3.8 million people in the Philippines fled from storms and natural disasters. Worldwide, most refugees are internally displaced in their own countries. In the end, everyone in BINUANGAN will be driven out by climate change. The dead can no longer be buried here. They have to be taken to the mainland. There are still 6,000 people living here in cramped quarters. BINUANGAN is sinking due to erosion and rising sea levels.
Almost everyone, even the kids, throw their trash around indiscriminately. The factories, the big capitalists and the wealthy people keep on pushing for progress and sacrifice nature in the process. I can see the extent of environmental destruction. The life of people in BINUANGAN is bound up with the water around us.
Sea levels are rising worldwide as the temperature of the atmosphere increases, causing ice at the poles to melt. That increase is due to the rise in greenhouse gas emissions, especially carbon dioxide, CO2. It's released when we burn coal, oil and gas in industry, heating and cars. The biggest CO2 emitters are the big industrial nations, above all China and the United States.
I've seen big changes here. Back when I was 15 or 20 years old, the rainy season was normal in May, June, July. But now we get frost in those months. In the past, we didn't have those problems. I can feel the changes. The rainy season is coming later, and at the same time we keep having cold snaps. In the summer we have long periods without rain. We suffer from that. And then suddenly we have too much rain.
Pilar Jacinto Pablo grew up here in the highlands of Guatemala. She's grown potatoes all her life, but in recent years things have changed.
This little plant, as you can see, isn't strong enough to survive. We can't use it for seeds or potato production. It's a loss.
Every year, drought and frost destroy many potato plants, which is all Pilar and her family grow on their fields.
This really affects our economic situation because we invest money in the plants. If we lose half of what we plant, then we don't produce enough to pay for all the things we need. If we lose everything, or even half of our normal crop, we still have to pay our bills and don't earn anything.
In Guatemala's western highlands, most people are small-scale farmers, and 3/4 of them live in poverty. During the rainy season, from May to October, the countryside changes from dusty and dry to lush and green. For Pilar, this would be the most trouble-free part of the year, if only rainfall patterns were like they used to be.
Water is so important for us and the community because we've no natural water sources. We depend on the rain for water. That's why we buy containers and canisters to catch the water. When the summer comes, that's the only way to store a bit of water. It's very important for our communities and our plantations. Without water, we can do nothing.
Around half the residents of Todos Santos have gone to the United States. After every drought, more and more leave. Most of the men are now working in the US. Every month, they send a few $100s. Pilar's house was built with US dollars. The family also uses the money to pay the installments on a loan they took out to finance the trip and the people smugglers. Like most here, Pilar and her family are Mam, an indigenous Mayan people. Pilar lives together with her children and grandchildren. Pilar's husband emigrated 3 years ago. They now make their decisions together over the phone.
Without my husband's help, it would be very difficult. When our harvest fails, we lose all our money. If my husband didn't send money, we wouldn't get by. And it's not just this one piece of land. We have more land where the harvests have failed. Without his help, we'd lose a lot of money.
As an illegal immigrant, her husband could be deported from the US at any time, so he doesn't want to be named. Pilar knows that migrants from Central America are no longer welcome in the United States.
I'm very worried about the things the US president plans to do, like that wall. There are a lot of people from here over there. If the president does deport a lot of them back to Guatemala, poverty here will get even worse.
We need all of the things that we're going to be putting in, and we need the wall. We need the wall to stop the drugs and the human trafficking. We need the wall.
You know, it's really difficult to, when you think of Donald Trump, what he believes. He's so contradictory in so many different scenarios, right? And you're going to build up this wall, but you're saying on Twitter climate change is a hoax. As climate change exacerbates other things that are going on, it's definitely becoming either a secondary or primary reason why people are leaving. And their answer, of course, is this, right? Of building up a border wall, building up what we see before us right now.
There's still no legally accepted definition for terms such as climate refugee, even though the World Bank predicts that Mexico and Central America will have at least 1.4 million internal climate migrants over the next 30 years, and many more who will migrate abroad. The number of Guatemalan migrants registered at the southwest US border has quintupled in the past 3 years.
The recent changes are the razor wire, and that's just this year. When I see that, that's when I think of Donald Trump, right? That's a very much Donald Trump addition to this. And I have, since the razor wire, I've been to the border on Brownsville, Texas, to San Diego, and all of it has this razor wire.
Todd Miller is an author who writes about security policy and climate change. He's been observing developments at the US-Mexican border for years.
If you go along the 2,000-mile US-Mexico border, there's about 650 miles of either walls or barriers of some sort. There's all kinds of technologies, billions and billions of dollars in technologies, from high-tech cameras that can see 7 miles away, radar systems, drones. There's a fleet of approximately 10 drones. There's other things that you see in US military operations. There's been a lot of these kind of transfers from conflict zones abroad to here.
Now the United States has a new conflict zone on its own doorstep. It's a crisis that the US and other industrial nations have helped to create.
There's 700 times more carbon emissions from the United States since 1900 than Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras combined. 700 times more. Yet this is the country that's fortifying its borders from people who are obviously impacted by those sorts of excessive amounts of emissions. And I think, how could that be possible? I mean, we've known about the science for so many years, and we had more than ever before, but at the same time, there's more border walls than ever before too. Like, it's like this emphasis, like this is a kind of adaptation plan, right, for the richer countries.
Que la familia que viene tiene pasaporte de su país, por eso puede viajar en el avión, no funciona así. Tal vez en nuestro país sí pensamos eso, pero ya estando aquí no, porque Estados Unidos quiere ver si usted trae su pasaporte, ok, dentro del pasaporte está la visa, ¿verdad? Bueno, ¿hay alguna otra pregunta?
No, eso es todo. Gracias.
Bienvenidos. That used to be the American dream, to come here, have your car, have your house. But migrants now, they always live under fear, because being caught by the migration, deportation, family separation, that's a big problem. So there is no such American dream for migrants. Pero todavía usaban trajes allá, ¿no? Traje típico. Huipiles, corte.
Sebastian Kinak works for the Guatemalan consulate in Tucson, Arizona. The city near the border is a first point of call for many migrants, especially after every sequía or drought that strikes Central America.
Big percentage of families, they live through the maize, corn, beans, vegetables, all. If there is sequías, all that's gone.
Casa Alitas is a reception center for migrants located in a former prison. Most of the arrivals stay for a few days before moving on to their family members in the US.
Y el nombre está diferente, va a sospechar. Entonces, ya eso más que todo ya sabe, nombre de A, dirección, fecha y hora. Con el juez directamente es lo que se da a entender este papel. Yo recomiendo que haga una consulta con un abogado de migración y por eso también le dieron una lista de abogados aquí. Y ya lo subrayaron también donde usted puede llamar a un abogado.
After the migrants have applied for asylum at the border or have entered illegally, immigration authorities bring them in buses to the center.
Sometimes they don't have anything. They just say you are in, that's it. You have no appointment. And where all those confusion, disorganized or no date, no place to go for your appointment, for appearance, no wonder now the government here are accusing families they don't show to for their appointment because they don't know what to do, where to go, when. All those, I'm helping them. That has become worse. I mean, the way families are treated.
A court decides who can stay and who will be deported. Migrants wait an average of 2 years for a ruling. The volunteers here help them with the bare necessities for a start.
Okay, sweater or blouse?
Where they go?
¿Qué es lo que usted necesita ahora? ¿Una blusa o un suéter?
Paz de Dios lo cuide.
Yo estoy aquí.
Y la paz de Dios ande con usted.
Okay. Ahora va a entender, mujer.
Siempre le encargo mi mandado.
Okay, está bien.
Sebastian came to the US in 1983 as a political refugee from Guatemala. Now he helps new arrivals.
Good, very good. They will call me soon to go back. You can imagine the fear that you have no work permit. So I went through that. And also changing your culture to learn everything new. Even the way you think or act, I guess. Yeah, it's very difficult.
When David Ramos arrived in Arizona 8 years ago, there was no reception center for migrants. He's still waiting for a permanent residence permit.
I'll always feel like a Guatemalan. I don't feel American. That's where I come from, and I'll only be here for a while. I don't have a green card yet, but what can I do? No matter what, I'll always be Guatemalan. The American dream is to do well, to have security, to have the things you need. That's what they mean when they say the American dream, progress. That you don't stay in the same situation you were in when you arrived from Guatemala. That you make progress.
David has a work permit that has to be renewed every 2 years. Even if he were to be expelled, what he's achieved here is something that many back home can only dream of. And he earns enough to help support his family in Guatemala. He grew up there on his parents' farm as one of 9 children.
I didn't enjoy my childhood all that much, but it was an ordinary childhood. We grew up working. My brothers worked with my father, my sisters with my mother. Then I started to look for a way to earn a living and how I could continue my studies. So I got a job in a workshop.
Here in the US, he works as a freelance gardener.
It's very different from Guatemala. A lot grows in the hot season, even though there's hardly any water.
Arizona has a desert climate and a severe lack of water. Life here is only possible thanks to water piped from the faraway Colorado River. But the cities of Phoenix and Tucson still use the resource wastefully. They're counted among the least sustainable cities in the world. Hundreds of thousands of liters of water go into keeping golf courses in the desert green.
It's a different life here. They have more ways of treating the water. We don't have that in Guatemala. I can't judge if that's fair or unfair. Things are more advanced here. When you look at their houses, they're not wasting water. They're using it for their plants. And since they have money, they can pay for as much water as they want.
David says someday he'd like to live like his clients, in his own house with a garden. To achieve that goal, he works 6 days a week.
When I started working here, I used to think about how I could be doing the same thing in Guatemala. The difference is that in Guatemala, I'd be working harder and earning less money.
Beautiful, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a nice day. Thank you.
He just earned $65 cash for an hour of gardening. David married a Guatemalan woman in the US. She comes from the same highland region as he does. He lives here in a trailer park with his wife and daughter. On Sundays, David likes to drive out into the desert. The hills remind him of home. He'd like to go back to Guatemala someday to see his family. But without a green card, he wouldn't be able to re-enter the US.
It makes me sad. It's tough to be separated from your family. They're over there, and only I'm here. But what can you do? We're separated, not because we want to be, but because we are forced to be by necessity. Over there, you can't make ends meet.
Daddy has not the things truly feels, and not the world of what it is, and did it my way.
Mama Lina. Hey.
No?
I'll never leave here. As long as this world remains, BINUANGAN will remain BINUANGAN.
What
What I would miss the most is our culture here. When I wake up in the morning, somebody knocks and offers me food.
Kakatok sa pintuan mo.
Maybe shrimp or crabs.
Aalokin ka kung gusto mo ng ulam. Minsan
And then someone brings me coffee.
Alimasag. And then, aalokin ka ng kape kung gusto mo ng kape. Kung meron ng pangangailangan, ang
if you need help, there's always someone in the neighborhood or in the family who will lend you a hand and provide support.
Yung mga kamag-anak nila.
Conditions in the ocean are changing. The fishermen are catching less and less. They can hardly earn a profit nowadays. Almost every family has at least one member who's left BINUANGAN.
Tama. Marami umaalis.
People are leaving here. They've gone to work overseas or in Manila.
Nagtatrabaho sa Maynila. Dito sa amin sa BINUANGAN.
As far as I can tell, the water level here in BINUANGAN will continue to rise. But we'll continue to build it up, to reclaim our beloved neighborhood. The people of BINUANGAN won't let this place vanish beneath the waves.
Not everyone here believes that the community can be saved. Every day, Jojo's neighbor Melody finds her house flooded.
I dream of settling in another place, not here. But my husband Jay is from here and he doesn't want to leave. I'm originally from the mainland, from Navotas, but Jay comes from here, and he won't leave this place.
Kumusta na?
Ito, araw-araw lubog.
Gano'n na yung naitambak nyo dyan sa bahay nyo?
Ito?
Oo.
Ito alam ko mga 300 sacks of, yung balat ng talaba.
Araw-araw, ganyan?
Buti nga ngayon, hindi na ganang malaki kasi walang hangin.
Oo. Umurong na siya.
Umurong na to.
Pero yung pinakamalaki...
Lubog to, kaya tinanggalan ko siya na dito.
Lubog yan. Pagka ano?
Ako yung dati kung narundan nyo yung ondoy, lubog yung banyo. Yung CR na yun, lubog yun. O tignan mo ito, kinalawang na yan. Lumulubog yan. Sa wata.
Sa munisipyo. May meeting sila eh.
There are plenty of indications. For example, the warnings on the radio and on the television. When a strong typhoon is approaching, we start tying down the roofs. We tie them down so they won't be blown away by the wind. And we usually buy supplies before the storm so that we have something to eat. The basics. While the storm sweeps through the village.
Nananalasa yung bagyo. Ganun lang lagi.
From typhoons to storms, extreme weather has grown more frequent in recent years. Scientists still don't know to what extent this rise is connected to human-induced climate change.
Any place you look at that's supposedly a victim of climate change, no. They're a victim of lack of freedom. They have very little capability. And so, yeah, everything sucks, including the climate sucks. But it's not because we put more CO2 in it. It's just because life sucks when you're a human being on a difficult planet with very low capability. So, for example, if you look at the US, We have every form of climate imaginable. We have a polar climate in Alaska. We have like swampy Florida. We have California where I live, which I think is the nicest climate. But we all have life expectancies over 75. Why? Because when human beings are sufficiently capable, they can adapt to and even master any climate, versus when they have very low capability, when they're in primitive and poor societies, they can't deal with anything. So I think one of the big things that's misplaced in the climate discussion is there's not enough focus on how do we increase human capability. I'm an energy philosopher, which means I try to help people think more clearly about energy and environmental issues.
Alex Epstein is widely known as a climate change skeptic. At least 13% of Americans share his views on global warming, a higher proportion than in any other Western country. Epstein advises oil companies on how to sell their products better, also using climate denial arguments.
People have a very deep-seated fear of changing our environment, and I think that causes them when we change our environment through fossil fuels, through, say, having a warming influence on climate, I think people tend to exaggerate and get overly fearful versus looking at it proportionally.
Since the 19th century, the US has burned more coal, oil, and natural gas than any other country. The current administration has refused to take responsibility for that, and in 2019 officially gave notice that the US is withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. That's bad news for the countries in the global south. They're already the ones most affected by climate change and are least able to deal with the impact.
I think it's been great for us to have a lot of energy, but also it's been amazingly positive for the poorer parts of the world that we've used all this energy. So what's happened is we've been spending decades and decades and decades thinking about how to improve life, including things like medical discoveries that have then been shared in large part with the poorer parts of the world. So there's a certain narrative that, oh, we've made people's lives worse, but no. The wealthy world has made, insofar as they've created all of this innovation, has made everyone's lives better. So I don't think we should feel guilty about it, and I think we should be very proud. I think that humanity, there are a lot of problems, but life has never been better, and Earth has never been a better place to live. And I think most people, if they think about it, would agree. I don't think they would want to go back to 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Whenever I do anything, I know that fossil fuels are making it possible. So when I go to the beach, I'm using fossil fuels because there are machines that are working for me to produce my food using these amazing fuels so that I can just relax on the beach. So it's not I love fossil fuels because I love wasting energy or showing off with some gigantic truck that serves no purpose. It's I love the amount of capability that they give me and ultimately the amount of control that I have over my time.
In the Arizona desert, scientists at the Biosphere 2 experimental station are trying to find out how to model and perhaps save the Earth's major ecosystems.
Biosphere started out as the world's largest ecological experiment ever conducted, with a closed or controlled environment to try to replicate Earth systems and to better understand them. The Earth is truly unique, and we know that that uniqueness is what allows us to live and survive. And if those conditions change so much so, it could definitely threaten, or it will threaten, our survival. And so I think understanding what those potential implications are before they actually play out are crucial.
The research center houses 7 model ecosystems. It's a unique place where, under close to real-world conditions, it's possible to test how natural systems will respond to extreme environmental change. The researchers can control the climate and measure how the ecosystem reacts. In the model rainforest, an international team of scientists are studying what happens when there's less rain.
The unique thing is that in the biosphere we can control the entire forest. We can decide when it will rain and how much. We're measuring how the tropical rainforest responds when it's still in its normal state. And then we're going to initiate a long drought and see how the ecosystem behaves. Once it gets drier, the rate of photosynthesis goes down. We want to know at what point a system like this reaches its limits.
It's important to know what will happen in the world's forests in the future.
Trees store CO2, the climate gas that causes this atmospheric warming, which arises from the combustion of fossil substances. Plants take it up during photosynthesis. What we see around the world is that up to 30% of the emissions that we put into the atmosphere can be taken up again by forests. So they act as a huge buffer that helps mitigate the climate effect. Without them, it would be much worse.
Scientists first warned about global warming decades ago, but it took years for the message to even begin to sink in. Today, it's apparent that the climate is changing faster than scientists had predicted.
We know that extremes are becoming more intense, so droughts and heat waves could grow more severe, as could catastrophic rainfall events that result in flooding and the like. These extremes will increase in frequency, and that's a direct effect of the changes we're creating in the atmosphere due to climate change.
But at the end of the day, we are all inhabitants of Earth. And so what happens here in the US, or what happens in Europe or Asia, at some point is going to impact all of us. So I think it behooves all of us to recognize that we are seeing changes, that those changes have impacts on ecosystems, on resources, and we are dependent on those systems for our existence. And so again, if they change so dramatically, it is going to impact us, and potentially, if we're not able to adapt, we will no longer survive.
Pilar is seeking help to defy the extreme weather. Her potatoes are her livelihood. Now she's lost not only a large part of the harvest, but has too few seed tubers for planting next year. A seed bank helps farmers like Pilar.
Buenas tardes. Bienvenido aquí en la parcela. Sí. Ah, lo llevó la helada. Sí. Estuvo tremendo la helada, pues. Híjole. Y ahora quiere recuperar su semilla. Sí, pues no tenga pena, aquí le vamos a conseguir.
53 domestic potato varieties grow on the fields here. The seed bank gives Pilar tubers. In return, she'll have to give up some of her next harvest.
De esa papa que usted trae. Ah, bueno. Lo puede llevar también. Entonces, cuando ya.
A farming cooperative collects and stores seeds from local crops. That way, local growers can obtain seeds if need be. So when the next drought hits, they're less likely to have to give up their farms and leave. In some villages here, half the population has already gone to the US. Vecinos fantasmas, ghost neighbors, is what the owners of these unoccupied houses are called. They live in the US but send money home to build their American-style dream houses for when they return. The cemetery in Todos Santos, Cuchumatan, also has tales of migration to tell. American flags decorate the graves of those who died as immigrants in the US. Pilar can't imagine ever leaving.
My husband told me about the trip to reach the US. It was very, very hard. And now he can't move freely in the US. It's different there, hard in a different way than it is here. As for me, I'd rather stay and work hard at our life here. If the trip were easy, everyone would go, but it's not. So I prefer to stay and work here.
When her husband left 3 years ago, he and Pilar made that decision together. They knew they wouldn't see each other again for many years.
I know that he's far from home and we're a long distance apart. But I also know that we did it because things are very hard here. And I know in my heart that this distance will not ruin our relationship. I know my husband will come back.
Scientists agree that climate change can no longer be stopped, but its magnitude will depend on whether people are prepared to radically alter their lifestyles.
As I drive myself, right, and I see all the cars that are going back and forth and 3 lanes of traffic, 4 lanes of traffic, and I think that as a person that's aware of the climate crisis, and you think, oh, is there any progress being made? And all I have to do is go down the main avenues and think, no. Like, I don't know, like, if I turn on the television, I don't know how many times I'm told to buy a car, right? I buy a car, you know, on one hand, there's a climate crisis, right? And then on the other hand, I'm always being told to buy the new car, new car, new car. It's actually sometimes quite depressing, right? There's more information about the climate crisis than ever before. Scientists are getting more forward and direct in what they're saying we should do, right? Yet this still continues on, this kind of blind, like sleepwalking into our own destruction. I'm not even thinking about myself anymore, really. I'm really not. I'm thinking about my children, and not only my children, my children's generation, and not only the generation in the US, I'm thinking about the children everywhere, spread across the world, and what's going to happen with this climate crisis. I mean, as you look around the world, it's all adding up. The stresses put upon people are getting worse and worse. I think what the world needs to be looking at is we're going to have people on the move, right? There's some things set in motion that cannot be stopped. Like, there's going to be places that can no longer be lived in. And now this idea of a more bordered world is an idea of exclusion, where certain people have access and others do not. And we have to instead start thinking of a world of where there's going to be a lot of people on the move, and how can we begin to understand that and maybe or begin to at least forge a sort of new world where those people will be more welcomed.
I sometimes dream of the flood, the deluge. Because of people's stubbornness, because they did not obey God's laws, He punished the whole world. Then God promised that He would not do the same thing again. But look at what's happening now. It's happening slowly, in different places. It's the same scenario all over again.
Jojo might soon find himself a climate migrant. If sea levels keep rising, not just his home, but the entire island district could be submerged. How long that might take, nobody knows.
I don't like what's happening, especially for the coming generations. I pity those children who will grow up without experiencing the beauty of this place. If we continue on this path, we won't be able to do anything about climate change.
In the highlands of Guatemala, the descendants of the Maya believe that the global climate is out of kilter because humans have lost their respect for Mother Earth.
It depends on us. If we conserve water and care for the trees, we'll have a chance of surviving. But if we continue like we're doing now and cut down the trees, the future for our children will be very hard. Thank God we still have water and trees and can survive. But if we continue to destroy nature and the earth, in the future people will have nothing left to drink and to eat.